This is a guide to peaking and tapering for raw powerlifting, specifically trying to clear up some of the most common mistakes that I see people making. My name is Michael Elrod-Erickson. I'm the assistant coach for Team USA Powerlifting, and I helped create the curriculum for the USPA's coach certification course. We're going to start with some definitions. Peaking is simply trying to maximize your performance on meet day, and that's generally done by increasing the intensity and specificity as you get closer towards the meet. So you should be doing the competition movements for low reps with heavy weights. Another important component of peaking is tapering, which is cutting back on how much training you're doing in order to reduce fatigue and let you better express your strength. Tapering often involves cutting back on both the volume and intensity of the main lifts and accessories. So your peaking block is probably somewhere in the range of 2 to 6 weeks. And that last 1 or 2 weeks is typically going to be the taper where you start to dial things back. Here's why tapering is an important part of optimizing your performance for meet day. When we train, we have positive effects like an increase in fitness, skill, and strength, but there's also a negative effect of an increase in fatigue. Both of these things gradually drop off over time after that last training session. Tapering is all about trying to balance these two factors by cutting back at the right time in the right quantity. Look at this graph of the fitness fatigue model. It's showing that peak performance happens shortly after the last training session, or in this case, a long period of hard training leading up to the meet, when fatigue has started to drop off a good bit, but the positive effects of training like fitness have not dropped off too much yet. So that peak performance happens in a window, and then if you waited too much longer after that, or you tapered too aggressively, then you would end up on the far right where performance has dropped a lot because not only has the fatigue dropped, but so has the positive aspects of training because you waited too long. If anything, you'd be a little better off tapering too little and still having some fatigue, but still having your skill and strength be really high from having trained fairly recently. As an extreme example, would you rather have a person who's regularly in the gym, who's a little bit fatigued, but still really strong, or a couch potato who's never lifted in their life, who has almost no fatigue, but also pretty much no strength and skill? Obviously, it's better to be the strong lifter with some fatigue. So when in doubt, we want to lean more in that direction. This is the mistake that I see being made far too often with raw powerlifters. And it's because most of the peaking and tapering advice in powerlifting originally came from decades ago when equipped lifting was much more common than raw powerlifting. They were using squat suits, bench shirts, deadlift briefs, equipment that let them lift significantly more than their body was capable of without the equipment, and significantly more than most raw lifters are lifting. So they needed longer of a taper in order to have peak performance. But if you apply that same timeline to yourself as a raw lifter, then you're probably significantly detraining by meet day. So that leads us into the first of the 3 common mistakes, which is when people are taking their last heavy lift in training prior to the meet. How far out you need to take this is going to depend on some factors like your strength and skill level, your age, your sex, your body size, whether you use PEDs or not, your training frequency, and your training history. So the overarching concept for all of these is going to be the absolute load on the bar. The heavier it is, the longer it's probably going to take you to recover from that lift, and therefore you should be taking it further out from the meet. Just a couple of these are exceptions or special cases though, so I want to go over those. Age is one where being older typically doesn't mean that you're lifting more weight, but it does mean that it's going to take you a little longer to recover from the lift, so you should take it further out from the meet if you're older. And the other one is training frequency. If you train a certain lift with a higher frequency, like benching 3 or 4 times per week rather than 1 or 2, then you are going to detrain much more rapidly when you stop doing that lift or after your last heavy lift. So you're going to want to keep that lift in a little longer and a little closer to the meet if you tend to train with a high frequency. Another important thing to keep in mind is that there's no one hard date that you need to take your last heavy lift on. There's a bit of a range in which it would be acceptable to take it in. And you can also expand that range a little bit by either going heavier or lighter. So if you are taking the last heavy lift a little further out from the meet, then you can make it just a smidge heavier or if it's a little closer to the meet than that ideal range, then you can do it just a little lighter so that you can still recover in time by the meet. This is helpful because it means that you don't have to rearrange your entire training schedule in order to get that last heavy lift to fall on a certain day. So if you're used to squatting on Wednesday and that last heavy lift you were shooting for 10 days out from your meet and that falls on Friday instead, then you're welcome to just shift it 2 days earlier to your Wednesday, but maybe make it 0.5 RPE harder than it would otherwise be, or bump it up by like, a small margin, such as like 1.5%. The last thing is your last heavy lift doesn't have to be RPE 10 or maximal. The vast majority of the time, I would recommend making it an RPE 9 or slightly submaximal, but still very challenging lift, because this leaves you room to go up a little bit on meet day, because remember, we're trying to peak on the platform and hit your heaviest lifts there, not in the gym ahead of time. Here's 3 example profiles of lifters and how far out from the meet I would take their last heavy lift based on the individual factors. So there is a small teenage female with fairly light maxes as example 1. Example 2 is a more average sized young adult male with pretty moderate maxes. And then example 3 is a much older male who's pretty large on PEDs and has higher maxes. So you can pause the video and check out the exact timelines for each of them. But the key things that are being illustrated here is how as you get stronger and as you have more factors that are meaning it's going to take longer to recover from, that last heavy lift is further and further out from the meet. And you can also tell how there's a bit of a range in which you can take these last heavy attempts, and you can further extend that range by taking it either heavier if it's further out or lighter if it's closer to the meet. The next mistake that I see people making all the time is cutting their accessories way too far out from the meet, often like an entire month before the competition. The problem with this is it significantly drops your training volume. Accessories probably make up at least a third to a half of your total training volume. So if you just get rid of this a whole month out, then you're going to peak way too early while you're still in the gym rather than on meet day, because you're reducing your training stress so drastically that the fatigue starts to drop off, your performance increases, but it's way too soon. And then by actual meet day, it's dropping off again because you're detraining. Another problem is it leaves you vulnerable to injury, because another benefit of accessories is they take you through different ranges of motion and positions to help keep you healthy. And then if you are competing 2 to 3 times per year and you're cutting your accessories a whole month out, then that's 2 to 3 months per year where you're just not doing any accessories, which is around 17 to 25% of your total training. And that's going to really stunt your progress. If you're not training accessories that much, you're probably not going to put on as much muscle or strength in the long run. I would suggest you only cut your accessories 1 or 2 weeks out from the meet. Typically, I lean more towards that side of 1 week out, and I'll even sometimes keep in accessories that train muscle groups that aren't being addressed by the main competition lift. So things like upper back, core, arms. I might still sprinkle in 1 or 2 pretty easy sets like RPE 5, even all the way up to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of meet week, because the lifter's still going to be able to recover from those by, say, Saturday when they're competing. The third and final big mistake that I see people making is they don't do anything at all the week of the meet. And that's because they think that they have to just rest and not generate any fatigue, when in reality, you're probably better off doing some really easy training in order to keep your body moving. So think about it this way. When's the last time you were sick or on vacation for about a week and then you came back to the gym? Your first session back, did you feel good? Probably not. You felt really stiff, kind of uncoordinated and achy. Same thing going into meet day. If you just sit around and don't do anything for 7 days, you're probably not going to feel that great on meet day. So you're missing out on the chance to keep your skills fresh, keep your body moving and feeling good. And then you're missing out on a chance to kind of prime your nervous system with some really light training around like 24 to 48 hours out. So my suggestion is always take some light squats and deadlifts on Monday, assuming this is a Saturday meet, If not, just adjust the timeline accordingly to how many days out it is. Then on Tuesday, take some light bench press. And then on Thursday, I always have lifters run through all their regular warm-ups and mobility stuff, as well as some light goblet squats, either push-ups, if it's someone that can bang out a lot of push-ups pretty easy, and if not, then dumbbell bench press and dumbbell RDLs. So essentially, this is just a very light version of your squat, bench, and deadlift. In terms of load on these various things, this next one here is an example. In this case, it was a team training plan where they didn't typically tend to train that many days per week. So we just condensed the Monday and Tuesday together. So the squats are around 65% of their max. Same for deadlift. Bench press is around 75%. And then that Thursday session, the goblet squats are really light. These are people that were squatting probably mid 400 pounds. And I'm telling them to use a 50-pound dumbbell for goblet squats. So very small percentage of their max squat. And then dumbbell bench press, around half the weight that they would normally use for a working set there. And then the dumbbell RDLs, I said around 35 pounds per hand, whereas their max deadlift is probably in the 500s. So again, these are very light weights. We're just trying to keep the body moving and have them feel good for meet day. So in conclusion, the big concept from this whole video is don't get so caught up in trying to reduce fatigue that you also cut your training too much and too early and absolutely ruin your meet. Remember, you should take your last heavy lifts a little closer to the meet, wait much longer to cut your accessories, and keep moving during the meet week. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Instagram, where it's Michael_Elrod_Erickson. You can send me an email at michael@liftpremier.com, or you can visit my website, liftpremier.com, for coaching and free resources.